Hey, what's up guys, Murderman4 here, and today I'm going to be reviewing The Lie of the Land, which is the 8th episode of Series 10, and the final episode of the Monk Trilogy. So, how does The Lie of the Land stack up against the other two parts of this trilogy? Well, it's easily the weakest part of the trilogy. I wouldn't say that it's bad, but it's certainly underwhelming. And unfortunately, this also marks the first time in Series 10 that I've watched an episode and felt underwhelmed. Once again, that's not to say that it's a terrible episode, and it does have some really good ideas and moments in it, but it doesn't hit the mark for me. So as usual, of course, we're going to start with the very beginning of the episode, the pre-title sequence. We don't have a previously sequence of this episode, which is a little bit of a surprise, but the way the pre-title sequence is done, it introduces you to the episode very efficiently, without necessarily having to tell of the details of the past episodes, as it starts out with the Doctor narrating that the monks have been a part of Earth's history forever and have watched and guided humanity through all the important moments. And they were proud as humanity invented things like the light bulb or the internet. And I thought that this pre-title sequence was amazing. One of the best that we've had in at least a very long while. And this got my hopes even higher than they were already from the pyramid at the end of the world. But I love the idea that the monks have been brainwashing the population into thinking that they've been there for the entirety of Earth's history, and that they've essentially invaded history just through the power of mind-washing. And we get to see there are some people who are resisting this and don't believe this at all. But through the general population's belief, it's become the truth, even though it's actually a lie. And what's also really striking is to have the Doctor narrating this, especially leading directly into the titles where he says,
"Your future is taken care of."
And he gives this really creepy grin towards the camera. And I love it, because you're thinking, why is the Doctor caught up in this? Why is he explaining all this on the television? Why is he promoting the monks? And it gets you really intrigued. My one gripe with the pre-title sequence, it isn't a problem with the writing, it's a problem with the editing. You have the Doctor narrating and he says, "Who could forget the time that the monks defeated the Daleks, or the Cybermen, or the Weeping Angels?" My main problem isn't even with the idea that they defeated the Daleks or the Cybermen or the Weeping Angels. It's the archive footage that they use. For the Daleks they use footage from Into the Dalek, and for the Cybermen they use footage from Nightmare and Silver. But both Into the Dalek and Nightmare and Silver, A, do not take place on Earth, and B, both of them take place in the far future. So, why are they using clips like that? I understand that it's showing the destruction of both these species, but why couldn't they have either A, quickly filmed some sort of clip, in an Earth-based setting? That wouldn't have taken very long at all. Or use archive footage that actually makes sense, that we've seen in previous Earth invasions. For example, The Stolen Earth / Journey's End, or Dark Water and Death in Heaven. Anyways, minor gripe with the editing. Just when I first saw that, I was a little bit bewildered because it didn't make any sense. But another thing that I loved about the pre-title sequence was the global scale that it had. While I wish we could have seen the monks themselves in these different places around the world, it's really great to see these monk statues cropping up all across every single continent. It's really neat, it gives a great sense of scale, and there are a couple of shots with statues at Niagara Falls and Toronto, both of which are very near where I live, which is just awesome, because I don't think that Doctor Who has ever really had anything set in Canada before, let alone anywhere near where I live. And I know it only shows up for like 2 seconds, if that, but it still got me very excited. Anyways, after the titles we see Bill, who we see is trying to resist the monks' brainwashing, kind of similar to the woman we saw in the pre-title sequence, and then Nardole turns up. He's been missing this entire 6 months that the monks have been here, as is the Doctor. Nardole has seemingly recovered from the bacteria sickness that he had at the end of last episode. It's waved away with one line that he was on bed rest for 6 weeks or something, which I don't think is very acceptable. It's not a satisfying payoff to Nardole getting sick by this powerful bacteria. I understand they needed some way to take Nardole out of the equation, but they should have done it in a way where Nardole wouldn't have to make an impossible recovery off screen. I get he's not human, but it's a pretty weak explanation in my opinion. Anyways, we find out that the Doctor is being held as a prisoner by the monks and he's being made to make these broadcasts, and so Bill and Nardole decide to break into where the Doctor is being held and rescue him. And so they do this, and the Doctor calls for his guards, and he also calls for the monks. And the Doctor is telling Bill that he is actually with the monks. He has sided for them. He's decided that it's better for the human race that the monks take control. And I thought that this scene was amazing. I thought it was excellently acted, excellently written. Promaki's performance in this was so wonderful to see. And I think just the concept of the Doctor fighting on the wrong side is such a wonderful concept that's not really been explored before. And so this was stated in the BBC synopsis for the episode, and I was really excited to see this, and to be able to see this playing out on screen, and Bill just feeling completely and utterly betrayed by the Doctor, and him just trying to explain away why he feels that it's necessary for him to do this. I thought that that was just really, really well done. But then Bill gets to the point of holding a gun up to the Doctor, and as she holds him at gunpoint, he says, "This isn't a trick, this isn't a plan, I am with the monks." And then she shoots him, which is not super shocking because we saw it in the Next Time trailer, and this leads into a fake regeneration, which under normal circumstances I think might be pretty cool, but the way that it was played out in this episode, honestly, after that happened, I felt like that was completely pointless and useless, and to me it literally just felt like it was there to put in the teasers and the trailers, and especially because everyone knew that Peter Capaldi is going to be leaving, I just feel like that was shoehorned in there. Now if we didn't have those clips in the trailers, or we didn't know that Peter Capaldi was leaving, then I think this scene would have been so much more effective. But both of those were the case, and we saw clips of Peter Capaldi in later episodes from this season, so we knew that he wasn't actually going to regenerate, and so it was kind of useless. And this regeneration also brings up a couple of questions. He does ask Nardole, was the regeneration too much? I say yes, for a couple of reasons. One, how did he fake his regeneration? Is he using actual regeneration energy for that? And if so, is that going to take away from some of his future regenerations? Isn't that just a waste of regeneration energy? And number two, we know that Bill, even though the Doctor's mentioned regeneration to her, he's never actually explained it to her. And so she has no idea what regeneration is, and presumably none of the guards do either. So sure, to the audience and to Nardole, this makes the Doctor's death more believable, but to Bill, who the Doctor is trying to convince, it doesn't make any difference, and so it just seems really out of place. But that also brings me to another point. The Doctor's not actually working for the monks. He was just trying to make sure that Bill was not under some sort of influence by them, which honestly massively disappointed me, because as I said, I think the concept of the Doctor working for the bad guys is an amazing concept, and I feel like it was completely and utterly wasted here. Of course, it's certainly not a bad thing to have the Doctor being the good guy again, but I feel like the way that it was played out wasn't exactly the best. And so I've mentioned that I liked a lot of the things up to this point. After this fake regeneration is where it mostly started to go downhill for me, especially taking into consideration the lie of the land with Extremis and the Pyramid at the End of the World. I think everything after this point was not a satisfying continuation of the trilogy. Anyways, the Doctor decides that he's going to need to seek help from Missy, and so this kind of pays off what we saw in Extremis with the flashback sequences to Missy being put in the vault. And while I did enjoy the scenes with Missy in them, and I think it's a really interesting concept to have the Master trying to turn good, that's also something that we've never seen before. I do feel like these Missy scenes didn't really serve the Monk trilogy very much. To me, it just seems more to set up stuff that's going to happen in the finale when Missy returns. So they also kind of felt a little bit out of place for me, because yes, she does say she's had dealings with the monks before, and that's really convenient, by the way. And she does explain a way to kill them. They don't even end up going through with the method that she says will work. And so her inclusions in this episode, while I have no doubt that they're going to pay off a little bit more in the finale, as I said with the flashback scenes of Missy and Extremis, the vault scenes of Missy here feel a bit disconnected from the story as a whole. And I understand that maybe it's necessary to set up all this Missy stuff before we see her in the finale again, but it doesn't work for me in this trilogy. It feels really out of place. By this point, I haven't really talked much about the monks. And I mean, they're the main villain of this story, so why haven't I talked much about them yet? That's because they barely even make an appearance in The Lie of the Land. They've had a massive setup in Extremis and the Pyramid at the End of the World, and they don't even speak in this episode. They don't even say a word. And this is where one of my major disappointments of the episode comes from. We see a couple of shots of them looking really menacing. This shot in particular I thought was excellently creepy, but their presence is never fully realized. mostly just see the statues and not them in the streets controlling the people. And there's no big final confrontation with them by the end. We see a little bit of an attack later on, but honestly, they're barely even present. And while their control is hinted at overall, we don't really see much of it, and that was a major disappointment for me, because I thought the monks' design, their voices, they're wanting to take over Earth only when they're asked, I thought that seemed really, really interesting. But here, none of that is explored any further. Obviously, it's good to have a bit of mystery to your villains, but after this episode, we still don't know who they are, why they're on Earth, why are they disguising their true forms. Honestly, after giving it a bit of consideration, we don't even really see why the monks' rule is that terrible. Yes, we hear about labor camps and stuff, but the worst thing we actually witness is the corruption of Earth's history, and even then, they're not claiming any of man's inventions as their own or anything. They're just kind of there as a background presence, and the labor camps are directly related to this memory corruption kind of thing, and we don't really see anything that terrible from their rule. Some things are hinted at a bit, but we don't really get to see that, which despite the overall tone of the episode, it makes it a bit more difficult to believe why all these people are so desperate to defeat the monks when we don't get to see that reasoning why. I do think though that it's a really neat idea to not quite hypnotize, but influence the population's minds to believe that the monks have been on Earth for its entire history. I think that's a really neat concept, and it's really clever because obviously they've only been here for 6 months, as is stated a couple times throughout the episode, but they make everybody believe that they've always been there, and it makes them more content because, as Nardole says earlier, people are more likely to put up with things if they believe that's the way it always was. But they figure out that these influences on the mind are being transmitted by all those statues, and I guess there's just one central hub that's in that pyramid in the middle of London. And so they go on the offensive to try to get into that place so that the Doctor can transmit the true history of Earth and everybody will rise up against the monks. They get in there, there's a little skirmish with a couple of monks, but nothing too much, once again, very little from the monks. And then they enter this room that's full of all the transmissions of the false history, and the Doctor plugs his brain into it to try to transmit the true history, and he can't take it and gets thrown back, knocked out. And Bill, who Missy said earlier would have to die since she was the one who let the monks in, decides that she is going to try to do the same thing, and hopefully then that will reset everything that the monks have done. And what ends up happening is the monks start to corrupt her instead of her being able to corrupt the monks, but then the memory of her mom somehow overtakes it. I didn't quite understand what was happening there, and then suddenly everybody realized the truth. And something else I don't get, Bill's mind is able to withstand this, but the Doctor's isn't, even though the Doctor is a Time Lord brain. I don't know, I thought that the resolution was a little bit confusing. Didn't really make too much sense to me. I understood the basic concept of hijacking their transmissions to be transmitting the true history, but the way that it was done, I'm not entirely sure how exactly it was resolved properly. And then the monks just run away, which, I mean, I guess makes sense if they've been risen up against, but it completely diminishes the presence that they had in the last 2 episodes. And once again, we barely really see the power that they hold because we don't really see the monks at all, and then they just run away. So I thought that this episode was a massive, massive waste of that villain that was so brilliantly set up in the last 2 parts. But anyways, the monks are defeated, they've gone away, humanity is free again, and then humanity forgets. It's explained in the episode that the monks brainwashed everybody into forgetting their invasion, but that's a really lazy answer to me. Why can't humanity just remember? What's wrong with them remembering what happened? Why in every Doctor Who story where there's a major invasion, they always have to forget? It seems like a really lazy resolution to me, and a lot of things don't really add up. Like, wouldn't people start to wonder what those random statue bases were from, and what happened to all the people that died during that time? And do they not remember anything from the last 6 months? Are they just suddenly 6 months older, and they don't really have memories of what happened before? It's really confusing and really lazy and really disappointing. And that's it for The Lie of the Land. A disappointing conclusion to a trilogy that started out really, really well. I haven't seen all 3 episodes back to back yet, but from watching all the episodes individually, the way that I personally would have done it was get rid of Extremis entirely. Sure, it was an enjoyable episode, but it felt completely useless to me. I would have the Pyramid at the End of the World be the first episode, and then I would split the Lie of the Land into 2 parts, having at least one full episode of the Doctor actually fighting on the monk's side. Not as a trick, not as a plan, but legitimately thinking that he's doing good, but he's on the wrong side. That would be amazing. And then in the next episode, something or other can happen where the Doctor ends up fighting for the right side by the end. Or Bill saves the day by herself, and then after the monks are defeated, then the Doctor goes back to normal. Also, of course, I would have the monks have a much bigger presence, and we would actually see their oppression and their rule, as opposed to just hearing about it. I'm not much of a story writer. I'm not even much of a critic. I'm just doing this for fun. I don't have any sort of professionalism in either of those areas, but I feel like if the story had been structured more like that, my enjoyment of it would have been massively upped, and we wouldn't have had such a disappointing conclusion. Once again, though, I know I've talked about a lot of negatives about The Lie of the Land, but I did enjoy it overall. I really loved about the first third of it. The last 2/3 went downhill a bit, and it was underwhelming. If I had to choose one word to describe it, it's definitely underwhelming. I thought that a lot of the plot points were a little bit unfounded in logic, and it left me very unsatisfied. But I enjoyed it more after my second watch of it. I still found things to enjoy throughout it, and I was really debating what to give it in my head. I was going back and forth a bit. I think I finally settled on a 7 out of 10, maybe just above Smile. But still, it's pretty disappointing to go from my second favorite episode in the series with Pyramid to my second least favorite episode of the series with Lie of the Land. Anyways, that brings my series average to 7.56 out of 10, and so we're still doing pretty good. There hasn't been a single episode yet that I've truly thought of as poor, but in my opinion, The Lie of the Land is the first real misfire of the season. And next week we have Empress of Mars, the return of the Ice Warriors for the first time in 4 years. And to be honest, at first I was looking forward to this episode, but after seeing the Next Time trailer, I don't think I am so much anymore. I mean, we're gonna have to see. I don't usually judge before seeing something, but I've got this feeling in my gut that this is going to be the first episode of the series that is going to be less than good. But anyways, those are my thoughts and opinions on The Lie of the Land. Please put what you thought in the comments below. Did you love it? Did you hate it? Did you think it was a satisfying conclusion to the Monk trilogy? Or did you not, like myself? Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. And Murgaman4, over and out. I'll see you guys later.